more scary stories for sleep and dark screen scary stories. No ads, just gentle ghost stories to help you relax, fall asleep quickly. Explore nighttime tales for adults with a touch of sleep hypnosis and lucid dream guidance. You're listening to ASMR 404Found. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It starts quiet, so quiet you could swear the world had stopped breathing. The trailhead sat at the far edge of town, past the last gas station and the fading rows of mailboxes. The locals called it Pine Hollow Trail, though the sign that once held its name was warped and splintered with age, leaning sideways like it had been trying to step away from the forest. The wood was weather gray, and a deep gouge ran through the middle, as if something with claws had tried to erase the letters. A long time ago I'd heard about Pine Hollow my whole life, but never set foot on it. It wasn't exactly forbidden, but it had that quiet reputation. Kind people don't write down, but pass between each other in low voices. Hikers talked about feeling sick the farther and they went. Hunters avoided it, claiming the deer never crossed that ridge, and some said they'd seen lantern light moving deep in the pines at night, swaying slow, but never coming closer. I told myself I was going up there because I wanted solitude. That was partly true. I'd been spending too many nights wide awake, staring at the ceiling in my apartment, hearing traffic come by but feeling like the world was hollow. So I packed my gear, drove the dusty county road, and parked at the trailhead. It was late afternoon. The air had that warm, heavy feel before a cold front moves in, kind that holds the smell of pine sap and damp earth, and every breathy lot was empty. Gravel under my boots crunched sharp, echoing louder than it should have. The forest on either side of the trail rose steep, shadows already creeping between the trunks, though the sun was still high and there was no bird song, not one call, not a rustle. I stood at the edge of the trail for a minute, listening. Sometimes the silence feels peaceful. This didn't. It was thick, like standing underwater, like the trees had been close together and were holding their breath. He shifted my pack and stepped onto the dirt path. It was narrow, the edges feathered with dry pine needles. The scent of resin clung to the air, sweet at first, then sharper, almost metallic. The deeper I went, every step sank into the hush. Even the wind was going after. First half mile, I noticed something strange. The light didn't change. The sun should have been lowering behind the ridge, shadows stretching longer, but it stayed the same, a flat, dull gold filtering through the canopy. I checked my watch. It had been nearly 40 minutes. Yet the light was exactly as when I started. I told myself it was the tree cover that I just wasn't noticing. The shift. The path began to rise, winding between huge trunks scarred with black vertical streaks. Some looked like old fire damage, but the marks were too clean to deliberate, and each time I passed one, I caught a faint smell. Not smoke, something like scorched hair, faint but sharp enough to make my throat tight. Teeny kept walking after another stretch. I came to the first fork in the trail. The main path sloped left, but there was a narrower track veering right, almost hidden under branches. It looked less traveled, kind of side trail hunters sometimes use. I paused, pulling my water bottle from my pack, and that's when I heard ITA sound far back along the trail behind me, slow, rhythmic, like someone walking. No, dragging. The steps weren't crisp, they sounded heavy. catching in my throat. The trail behind me was empty, but the sound stopped exactly. When I faced Edie, waited nothing. The forest was still. He thought about heading back. But it was that stubborn streak in me that kept me going. If it was another hiker, maybe they were just keeping distance, and if it wasn't, well, I didn't want to think about that, yet he took the right fork there, cooled almost instantly. I could see my breath faintly, which made no sense for late summer. The scent of pine was gone, replaced by something damp and old like moss growing in the dark. That's when I noticed the trees here looked wrong. Their bark was smoother, almost like skin. The faint ripples running down toward the roots, and the roots themselves bulged above the soil, like frozen veins between them. The dirt was darker, wet, as if the ground had been freshly dug. Trailed thin until I had to push through low branches. Uncaught the edge of my jacket when I pulled free. I saw my sleeve was streaked with something dark. It wasn't sap, it was thicker, and when I touched it, it clung to my fingers in sticky strings. The smell was iron sharp. It made my stomach turn somewhere deeper in the trees. Branch snapped, not the brutal crack of something falling naturally. It was sharp, like a deliberate step, and then I heard the whisper. Not a voice exactly, more like the sound of breath, moving close to my ear, shaping a word without speaking it. It sent a shiver crawling slow up my spine. Turn in a slow circle, nothing but the trees, no movement, but I could feel it now. The sense that I wasn't just being followed, I was being led. The narrow path kept curling forward, though I was certain it had stopped following the ridge. It sloped down now, subtly at first, until I realized my calves were aching with the constant descent. The air grew colder with every step. My breath rolled out in pale clouds that drifted slow and thin, dissolving before they should have. I reached for my phone, intending to check my map, but the screen stayed black, not off, just black, like it wasn't receiving light from its own display. I pressed the buttons, swiped at the glass, even tried powering it down and up again. Nothing. I slid it back into my pocket, telling myself it was just dead battery, but my fingers felt stiff on the zipper, like I'd been holding them too close to ice. The trail floor shifted from dirt to a kind of packed gray soil, streaked with pale stones. Some of them jutted from ground in sharp shapes that reminded me of ribs. The trees here leaned inward, their trunks twisted toward each other like they'd grown together in places, their roots dangling under the path and knotted ridges. I stepped carefully, because the footing was bad, but because I kept thinking of what might be inside those roots, as if something had been trapped beneath them for a long time. I wasn't just quiet anymore. There was a faint sound in the distance, low and steady, almost like a slow heartbeat. At first I thought it was my own in my ears, but it grew louder, matching my steps, not matching my breath. Every few seconds, the ground under my boots seemed to tremble in time with. Edie stopped and crouched, pressing my fingers to the dirt. It pulsed, not strongly, but enough to know it wasn't my imagination, like there was something alive far beneath the trail. Too deep to see, but close enough to feel. The smell hit me, then damp, metallic, but with something else, a sour, rotting sweetness that clung to the back of my tongue. I swallowed hard and kept walking, because I had the sharp feeling that if I stopped for too long, something would catch up to me around the next bend. path opened into a small clearing. The light here was dim. There were no clouds overhead, no canopy thick enough to block the sky. It was as if the sunlight itself was being thinned out. Before it touched the ground, in the center of the clearing stood an old wooden sign. The words, just a flat, weather-beaten board nailed to a leaning post across its surface, were dozens of deep grooves, as if someone had dragged a blade across it over and over, carving nothing but empty marks. The wood at the base of the post was blackened, crumbling to ash when I brushed my boot against it on the far side of the clearing. The trail narrowed again, but before I moved forward, I saw something in the dirt to my left, a boot print faint, but recent. The edges were sharp, and there was still a fine dust settled in the middle, like it hadn't had time to blow away. It wasn't mine. I knelt closer, heart thudding, and saw another beside it, then another, leading toward the edge of the clearing. They weren't heading down the trail. They stopped at the base of one of the leaning trees, and then nothing. No more prints, no sign of a turn, just conthets when the wind moved for the first time since I'd entered the trail. It came from behind me, cold and damp, carrying with it the faintest sound of a voice. It wasn't speaking words, I knew, but the tone was low and coaxing, like it was urging me to follow. I froze. The hair on my arms rose under my jacket. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but I didn't, because the voice wasn't coming from behind anymore. It was in front of me. Stepped toward the narrow path at the far end of the clearing. The heartbeat sound was stronger here, almost a steady thrum in the ground. The trees leaned so close together that I had to push through, my shoulders brushing against their cold, smooth bark, and somewhere in the dark between them, I saw the faintest light, a dull, pale glow, not flickering like a flame, but steady. It moved slowly to the left, then back again, like someone pacing with a lantern held low. We followed a wet path, twisted in a way that made no sense. Each turn sharper than the last, doubling back on itself, but never leading back to where I'd been. The glow was always just far enough to keep me moving. Never closer, never farther, and the whole time, that low heartbeat thudded beneath my feet. When I finally stepped into another open space, I realized it wasn't a clearing this time. It was a hollow. The ground here was bare, no grass, no roots, just that dark gray soil with faint ridges, like something had dragged itself in circles over and over. In the center sat a stone well, its rim covered in thick moss. The glow came from inside. Edie approached slowly, my boot sinking a little into the damp earth. The heartbeat was strongest here, echoing faintly in my bones. When I reached the edge, I looked down into the darkness. At first, I thought the light was coming from water far below, but then it moved upward and I realized it wasn't light at all. It was something pale, something rising toward me. Stepped back, my breath catching, and the glow stopped just below the rim. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard it, that same whispering breath from earlier, only closer now, so close it seemed to come from inside my head. It shaped a single word this time, not in any language I recognized, but it was a name, my name. Hearing your own name in a place like that feels wrong in a way nothing else does. It wasn't like someone shouting it from far off. It was like the word had grown in my chest and crawled up behind my teeth before I could stop it, soft, drawn out, the way a parent might call a child to step closer to the porch at night. I backed away from the well one step to the pale glow beneath the rim didn't rise again. But the heartbeat under the ground kept its slow, steady thud, and I could feel it more clearly now, not just in my feet, but in my stomach, my jaw, the base of my skull, like my whole body was being tuned to match the trees around the hollow were taller here, their trunks pale and smooth. Not like pine anymore, no bark, no knots when the wind brushed across them. It made a faint hollow sound, almost like breath moving through a long tube. Some of them were marked with deep gouges, the same kind I'd seen on the signpost earlier, but here, the grooves weren't random, they were shapes, not letters I knew, but repeating marks, curling hooks. Cross lines, every one of them burned faintly darker at the edges, like the wood itself had been scorched from the instant I turned toward the path I'd come from. But the way was gone. In its place was a narrow gap between two leaning trunks. The ground inside sunk into shadow. I told myself I could push through and find the clearing again. I told myself that over and over while my legs carried me forward. The air grew colder with each step. The gap opened into another trail. This one wasn't dirt. It was lined with flat stones, each slick with moisture. They looked too regular to be natural, too old to be anything recent. The stones were marked like the trees, those same curling cross shapes, worn but still deep enough to catch in the dim light somewhere far ahead. I heard water not running, dripping slow, heavy drops hitting a hollow surface, each sound stretching into the silence. Before the next fell, I kept walking toward it, my boots making almost no sound on the stones. That's when I realized the forest noise was back, but not the way it should have been. There was no wind, no rustle of branches, no bird calls, just faint, steady noises like breathing, not mine, not even human in rhythm. Some breaths were long and deep, others short and shallow, overlapping like a crowd in a dark room where no one speaks. He felt them. Before I saw them, shapes just at the edge of my vision, not moving exactly, shifting. Every time I turned my head, they sank back into the shadows between the trunks, their pale outlines breaking into pieces that slid into the dark like smoke. I wanted to run, but the stones beneath my boots seemed to pull me forward, each step falling into the same slow pace. The dripping sound grew louder, echoing like it was coming from a wide cavern ahead. Then I saw the trail ended at a mouth in the earth, not a cave exactly, more like a great hollow tree trunk driven deep into the ground. Its edges smooth and curving inward. The dripping came from inside, where the pale glow flickered faintly, pulsing in time with the heartbeat that had followed me all this way. Breath-like sounds were all around now, some just inches away though. I saw nothing, and then one of them moved closer. I didn't see its face, I didn't see its body. I saw a pale hand, long fingers, skin stretched to thin, nails black and cracked, curled slowly around the edge of the hollow. It didn't pull itself out. It only held there, unmoving, as if waiting for me to come closer. The whisper came again, not in my head this time, but in the air, curling through the dark in that same low, coaxing tone. It spoke my name, then added another word, slower and deeper. I didn't know the meaning, but the sound made my throat tighten, my legs weak. It felt like an invitation, and I stepped forward. The ground tilted under me, and for a moment I thought I'd trip, but the stones gave way. They slid under my boots, As if they'd been waiting for me to reach the spot, I fell forward into the hollow, my hands scraping against the slick, pale surface as I slid down. The heartbeat roared now, not under my feet, but in the walls around me, in the air, in my chest, and the glow surged upward from below, swallowing the darkness in a cold, colorless light. At the bottom, the ground was wet, shallow water covered smooth stone, and in the center of it was the well, the same as above, but here it was whole, the moss gone. The stones clean, the pale light poured from its mouth, pulsing slow and steady, and as I stepped closer, I saw shapes moving just below the surface of the water inside it, to many limbs, to many eyes. Each movement was slow, like they were pressing against something just under the skin of the world. Whisper came again, louder now, rising from the water itself. It spoke my name one last time, and then I understood the other word. When the meaning of that word settled into me, it wasn't like hearing a translation. It was like remembering something I'd always known, something buried deep enough that it had never touched daylight. Until now, it wasn't a command exactly. It wasn't a request. It was a place, and it was telling me was already there. The water inside the well rippled, though there was no wind. Then pale shapes beneath its surface pressed closer, their forms bending and stretching as if the water wasn't truly liquid, but something thicker, something that resisted them. A face rose into view, not human, not animal, skin so pale it seemed to glow on its own, eyes wide and black, mouth thin and unbroken until it split open far too wide. It didn't breathe, it didn't blink, it simply held there, just under the surface, watching me in that steady, patient way that predators watch when they know you can't escape. The air in the hollow was heavy now, damp and close, tasting faintly of rust and something sweet that made my jaw ache. The heartbeat slowed, each pulse sending a shiver through the shallow water around my boots. Somewhere behind me, the faint breathing of the forest shapes moved closer. One exhalation brushed the back of my neck, cool enough to raise goosebumps. He turned slightly, just enough to see them in the edges of my vision. They weren't standing still anymore. They swayed side to side like tall grass in a wind I couldn't feel. Each time they shifted, their outlines bent wrong, heads too far to one side, shoulders higher than they should be, limbs stretching without sound. Wells whispers slid back into my mind, not through my ears this time, but straight into that part of my thoughts. Didn't use words, images formed there. The trail above, empty, the clearing, the gouged sign, the dark fork, all of it lying still, untouched, as if years had passed since first stepped onto it. And in every image I could see the faint glow seeping through the soil, the roots, the stones always leading her. I realized then that the trail hadn't taken me off course. It had taken me down. The pale face under the water tilted slightly, and the whisper became clearer. It told me that the trail never ended, only narrowed until there was no path at all and only the descent remained. It told me that the people who entered didn't disappear. They simply joined the path in another way. And when it said this, the shapes in the shadows around me began to move forward, their pale hands brushing the wet stone, their long fingers leaving streaks behind that shimmered faintly in the dim glowed water, and the well trembled. Something began to rise from it, taller than any person. its form shifting with each inch it gained. It wasn't walking, it was uncoiling. Each movement was smooth, deliberate, without sound. I felt my knees bend, my body lowering without meaning to, like I was leaning toward it. In recognition, the heartbeat slowed again, one long pause between each heavy thud, until they were so far apart I thought it had stopped altogether, and then the whisper spoke my name. For the last time, softer than before, almost like a breath against the inside of my skull. The shapes behind me stopped moving. The pail. 4 men. The well still, the air hung heavy and cold, and I stepped forward. The water didn't splash. When I crossed the rim, it closed over me like warm fabric, pulling me down without struggle. There was no pressure burning in my lungs, only the pale glow everywhere, keeping me in it until there was no above or below. No sound but the faint beat somewhere deep in the earth. I don't remember leaving. I don't remember climbing out. I only remember walking. And now, when I pass the end of a street at night, or see the edge of a wooded lot in my headlights, I can feel it under my feet again, that slow thrum in the ground, that faint glow seeping through the dirt, calling my name, letting me know the trail is still there, and that sooner or later, I'll follow it back. I want you to picture the old Timberline Creek trailhead way out past the last paved road, where the pine trees crowd so close together. They look like they're leaning into distant gravel crunches under your tires, like it knows you shouldn't be there. Ray had heard about Timberline Creek. Growing up in northern Idaho, folks around town spoke of it in that quiet, almost whispery way, like they were afraid saying its name too loud might wake something up. These said hikers went missing up there, and not in the ordinary, got lost in the woods kind of way. No, they said people came back wrong, or didn't come back at all. Some returned weeks later with no memory of where they had been, or what had happened. Just this classic look in their eyes, and a tendency to wander off into the trees when no one was watching. You should have listened. But you know how it is when you're curious and restless and a little too sure of yourself. So, one October afternoon, with the air cold enough to bite my fingers, I loaded up my pack, grabbed my old flashlight, and headed out there. The sun was already low in the sky. By the time I reached the dirt road leading to the trailhead, the shadows from the trees stretched long and thin across the road, like they were trying to trip me. Every bump in the road rattled the gear in my trunky. Past one old rusted out pickup sitting half in the ditch, no sign of anyone around. The windshield was cracked and moss grew along the edges like it had been sitting there for years. You remember thinking someone must have gotten stranded and never came back for it. But that thought just sat wrong in my stomach. Because who abandons a truck way out here without telling anyone? When I finally pulled into the little dirt lot at the end of the road, the Timberline Creek trailhead sign stood crooked with splintered, weather-worn, like it had been there longer than the trees themselves. The letters were carved deep and dark and a little uneven, like they had been done by hand. There was a thin rope hanging from one corner of the sign, swinging slow back and forth. Even though there was no wind, he tried not to think about it. As I killed the engine, but the quiet hit me hard once the car shut off. No birds, no wind, just this heavy kind of silence that makes your ears ring and your brain start filling in noises that aren't really there. Ray pulled my pack on and stepped onto the trail. The ground was soft under my boots. pine needles muffling each step. The air smelled like damp earth and something else faint and metallic like rust. But sharper the deeper I went, the darker it got, even though it wasn't sunset yet. The trees were so thick overhead that the light couldn't cut through. Mochi kept thinking about how folks said the trail never seemed the same twice, like the turns and bends changed. But no one was looking. She didn't believe that sort of thing, but then I realized I couldn't hear my own footsteps anymore. It was like the forest had swallowed every bit of sound around me. About a mile and I found the first marker, just a small wooden post stuck in the dirt with the number 1 carved into it. The edges were blackened like they had been. Bernetti reached out to touch it and felt this cold pulse run up my arm, out like an electric shock, more like the way ice water makes your skin tighten. I jerked my hand back and kept walking faster than before, telling myself I was just being jumpy. Then I heard a faint but closet sound of someone breathing slow and steady off to my left. He stopped my own breathing so I could hear better, but the moment I did, it stopped too, like whoever it was didn't want to be caught. He scanned the trees, but they all looked the same, dark trunks in tight rows. The shadows tangled between them. After a minute, I told myself it must have been the wind, except there was still no wind, and I kept moving. The trail narrowed and started sloping down toward the creek. He could smell the water before I saw it, cold and clean, but still carrying that strange metallic bite. When I finally reached the bank, the water wasn't moving like a normal creek. It just sort of swirled in place, slow and deliberate, like it was thinking about where to go. I crouched to look closer, and my stomach turned. Reflection staring back at me wasn't Minute. The face had my eyes, my hair, but the skin was too pale and the mouth was just barely curled into a smile. It wasn't Mackenzie. Fell backward and scrambled up the bank, my hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped my flashlight. Even though it wasn't dark yet, he kept walking, telling myself to just finish the loop, get back to my car. But the further I went, the more wrong things felt. There was thicker, heavier, like it was pressing down on my shoulders, and the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of things I couldn't hear but could feel brushing past me in the dark space between the trees. Every so often, I'd see something move in the corner of my eye, but whenever I turned, there'd be nothing there, just more shadows, more trees. It was somewhere past the 3rd-mile marker. When I found the backpack, it was sitting right in the middle of the trail, a faded red one, with the zipper half open. Inside there was a water bottle half full, a small map of the area, and a pair of glasses with one lens cracked. The strap on one side of the pack was torn like it had been ripped off something. Looked around for the owner, calling out, but my voice sounded strange, too quiet, like the forest was swallowing it whole and giving nothing back. No echo, no hint of where it went. It's when I noticed the footprints, not minute boot prints, but bare feet pressed deep into the dirt, toes long and narrow in the arch, too high to be human. They led off the trail into the thicker wood sand. Even though every instinct told me to keep going, I followed them. The ground was soft enough that they left a perfect trail for me to trace, each one a little deeper than the last, like whatever it was had been moving faster and faster. After maybe 200 yards, the print stoppages stopped in the middle of a clearing. No sign of turning around, no sign of jumping or running away. Just go nigh. In the center of that clearing was A tree unlike any I had seen. The bark was bone white and smooth like polished stony end. There was something carved into it, a spiral starting small at the top, widening toward the basidi lines cut deep and raw like they had been made with something sharp. The moment I stepped closer, I heard that breathing again at this time. It was behind me and much, much closer. I didn't move, every muscle locked, every thought frozen, because I could feel it warm against my ear, that slow, steady inhale and exhale. It wasn't the breath of any person I'd ever known. It rattled deep in the chest, wet somehow, like something thick sloshed around with each pull of air. I didn't turn around, not yet. Instinct told me that if I looked, whatever I saw would live in my mind forever. My hand clenched around the flashlight so hard my knuckles ached, and I took one careful step toward the white tree. The breathing followed, matched me, leaned closer. When I finally turned, there was nothing, no shape, no movement. Just the same crowd of trees, shadows braided tight between their trunks, but the sound stayed. It didn't fade, it slid around me, slow and patient, as if it was deciding which side to choose. The white tree was the only solid thing left in the world, so I touched it. Smooth bark, cold as stone. The cold didn't just sit on my skin, it sank in, threading up my arm like ice in my veins. The spiral carving seemed to hook my eyes, drawing me into its curve. I had to pull myself away. When I turned, the trail was gone. The gap in the trees where I'd come from sealed, as if the forest had stitched itself shut behind me. I turned again. Every direction looked the same. The clearing didn't feel like it was standing still. It felt like it was folding in on itself, and the white tree stayed in the center. No matter where I moved, the breathing stopped. In its place, something else, a drag, like cloth over dirt, then heavier, a slow, weighted step that made the ground tremble under my boots. I swung the flashlight toward the sound. Between the trees, crouched low, was something, pale like the tree's bark, but not smooth. Its skin was stretched thin over shifting lumps, like something underneath was crawling and twisting. Its head tilted, the eyes were wrong, no reflection, just black to bits cut straight through the skull, and where a mouth should have been, the spiral, carved deep, spinning in and down and down. I stepped back and hit the tree, hard. The spiral in the bark was deeper now, wider, as if it was copying the one on that thing's face. I didn't wait. I ran, branches tore at my arms, my face. The air grew heavy with that metallic tang until I could taste it. My lungs burned. Don't remember choosing a direction, only pushing forward until the forest cracked open into the trail again, mile. Marker stood in the dirt ahead of me. I'd already passed it hours ago. I caught my breath, listening, but the forest had gone silent. That thick kind of silence, kind that makes your heartbeat sound too loud in your own ears. I started walking, faster. My flashlight jittered with every step. Then water, rushing. But Timberline Creek didn't rush, not even in spring floods. I turned a bend and stopped. The creek was wide, dark, moving fast in the churning black. I saw faces in the water, not on it, moving with the current. Their mouths open and closed, shaping words I couldn't hear. their eyes turned toward me. One of them was mine. I backed up and the current slowed, settling into that lazy, slow swirl I'd seen before. A voice behind me said, "Why did you follow it?" Low, rested, like it hadn't been used in years. I turned. A man stood a few feet away, clothes torn and stained, skin to pale. But his eyes still had some dim light left. He told me not to go further. Said the trail doesn't end where you think it does, and once you reach the last marker, can't leave without leaving something behind. I asked what he meant. He only shook his head and glanced over his shoulder. "Go back now," he said, "before it realizes you're still yours." I didn't argue. I turned and walked fast. The forest seemed to lean in over the path. The same red backpack sat in the middle of the trail again, but now zipped shut, straps unbroken. I didn't touch a dot when the trailhead sign finally came into view. The rope on its corner swung faster, like something had just brushed it. I reached my car, fumbled the keys. The engine stuttered, click, 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 before catching dot as I pulled out. My headlights swept across the sign. The spiral was there, freshly carved. I didn't look back the whole drive home, but at every red light, I swore I could hear breathing in the back seat. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I would hear the breathing. Beside Mesla's stereo closer, I would see the spiral turning in the door knot. Like a picture in my mind, but like it was right there inside my eyelids, scrolling deeper, pulling. Something out of me woke up twice, fingers twisted tight into the sheets, like was holding on to the edge of something, treeing not to fall, but the times me mouth had that same testament, lick, lick, click. The creek water morning came heavy and I told myself it had to be a dreamstress, maybe the woods playing tricks on maybe it. When I went to my cart, driver's door was unlocked. Katie knew I had locked it. I opened it slowly and there on the passenger seat was a small chunk of wood bone, white, smooth sprue carved. Deep edges splintered like it was cut too fast. He didn't touch it bare-handed. He wrapped it in a rag and tossed it into the trash bin behind my yard, but all day he felt something just behind me everywhere. Went the evening just before the sun drew petty. Saw movement through the kitchen window out of the tree linear, pale figure resting between two pine stoops. Far to see clear light, close enough to know it was watching me. Didn't go outside. I just stared back until the light fell and it was going in its place. On the ground was that same red backpack, zipped shut. This time I locked every door, every window. I stayed inside for a week. Things kept happening. Car radio would turn on, playing only faint static like someone breathing into it. Me phone camera would open on its own, snapping blurry pictures of trees or bark. I didn't recognize Ian. Morning he woke to find dirt under my nails, spine needles on the floor beside my bed. He started keeping notes, dates, time shot. I saw what I heard, but the more I wrote it, more my handwriting bent, slanted, curling into shapes almost like the spiral. Then came the night. He woke to the sound of water, but it wasn't the sink or the bathroom. It was the hallway. He stepped out in the creek. Was there a black swirling in the water, named boisterous tons? My night spoke this time, but not in my voice. It told me it left something behind it, Timberlandian. It wanted it back. The water reached for me, stumbled into my room, slammed the door, opened it again. The hallway was dry. Next morning he packed a bag, drove to timberland at the road felt longer, trees closing and the rusted truck still in the ditch pit. Now its windshield was kinda deep scratches across the hood. I reached the lot rope on the sign swinging fast like it was pointing me, and you walked quickly past the markers until I reached the white tree. I was there, a figure hunched, its broad face dark, empty eyes. I took the piece of wood from my bagnet, the one from the trash pit, another one found under my pillow this morning. He set it at the base of the tree ground, pulsed under my boots like it was breathing. Figure stepped closer, spiral spinning, pulling at Mimi thoughts me, Nama me selfie. Backed away, it didn't follow, it knelt, pressed its hand to the spiral. In the bark blinds glowed faint like immersive fought daddy. Turned and ran, it didn't care if the trail twisted, didn't care. If the markers lead the trailhead appeared, the sign straight, the rope still, he drove away, and when I reached down everything felt lighter, but I knew it wasn't gonna, just waiting 3 months. Later and quiet nights, he hear the breathing again, and last night through the kitchen window pane, the same deepens it, stood holding the red backpack zipper open, and inside was my face milling growing from the creek.